My daughter said, "Don't come for Christmas." The words landed like ice in my chest, freezing everything inside me. I never imagined my own child could speak to me with such coldness. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. Before we begin, I'd be truly grateful if you'd take a moment to like this video and consider subscribing to the channel. It helps me keep sharing these stories with those who need them most. I stood in my small Chicago apartment, my hand still gripping the phone long after she'd hung up. The December wind howled outside my window on the 9th floor, rattling the old glass panes that never quite fit their frames anymore. My fingers trembled as I set the phone down on the kitchen counter, next to the list I'd been making all week. Cranberry sauce? Check. Sweet potatoes? Check. The turkey I'd already ordered from the butcher down on Milwaukee Avenue? Check. All of it now meaningless. The apartment felt smaller than usual, the walls closing in with their peeling floral wallpaper that I'd been meaning to replace for years. Photographs covered every available surface. My daughter Sarah, at 5 years old, gap-toothed and grinning in her Halloween costume. My son Michael's high school graduation. The grandchildren, Emma and little Jack, blowing out birthday candles. I'd framed each moment carefully, preserving them like precious artifacts in a museum of a life that seemed to have happened to someone else. My worn armchair sat in the corner, its fabric faded from years of use. The armrests darkened where my hands had rested thousands of times. The television murmured in the background, some holiday movie I wasn't really watching. I'd learned to keep it on just for the noise, for the illusion of company. The silence in this place could be suffocating. I walked to the window and looked out at the Chicago skyline, the buildings lit up against the gray December sky. Snow was beginning to fall, small flakes that swirled in the wind before disappearing against the dark pavement below. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, watching my breath fog the window. Somewhere out there, in her comfortable suburban home in Naperville, Sarah was probably already forgetting our conversation. But I couldn't forget. I kept hearing her voice, that particular tone she used when she was annoyed, when I was an inconvenience. "Don't come for Christmas, Mom. We're doing something different this year. Just family." Just family. As if I wasn't family. As if I hadn't been the one who raised her, who sat up with her through every fever, every nightmare, every heartbreak. I remembered holding her when she was 3 days old, so tiny and perfect in my arms, feeling the overwhelming weight of responsibility and love. I remembered teaching her to ride a bike, running alongside her down the sidewalk, my hand on her back, ready to catch her if she fell. I remembered her first day of kindergarten when she'd clung to my leg, terrified. And I'd knelt down and promised her I'd be there to pick her up, that I'd always be there. The scarf I'd been knitting for Emma lay draped over the arm of the couch, soft blue yarn the color of her eyes. I'd started it in October, working on it every evening, imagining her face when she opened it. I'd chosen the pattern carefully, finding one with little snowflakes woven into the design because Emma loved winter, loved catching snowflakes on her tongue. Next to it was the partially finished red one for Jack, with a pattern of tiny cars because he was obsessed with anything that had wheels. And the cream-colored one for Sarah herself, elegant and simple, the kind of thing she could wear to her office. Hours of work, each stitch a small prayer of love. I picked up Emma's scarf, running my fingers over the soft wool. My hands ached from the repetitive motion of knitting, my arthritis getting worse each year. But I'd pushed through the pain because I wanted these gifts to be special. I wanted them to know I thought about them, cared about them, even when we weren't together. My phone buzzed with a text message. I picked it up, hope fluttering stupidly in my chest. Maybe she'd reconsidered. Maybe she'd realized how cruel she'd been. It was from Michael. "Mom, can you send me $2,000? Rent's due and I'm short this month. We'll pay you back in January, promise." I sat down heavily in my armchair, the air leaving my lungs in a rush. The promise to pay me back. I'd heard that before. Last month it had been $1,500 for car repairs that, when I'd asked about them later, seemed to have never happened. The month before, $1,000 for some emergency he never quite explained. I'd sent it every time, withdrawing money from my savings account, the account that had once held my modest fortune from years of careful investing in stocks, from the small inheritance my mother had left me, from a lifetime of working double shifts at the hospital where I'd been a nurse for 37 years. I remembered when that account had felt substantial. After my mother passed, I'd invested wisely, diversifying into stocks and even putting a small amount into Bitcoin when everyone said I was too old to understand cryptocurrency. I'd spent hours learning about it, reading articles late into the night, determined to be smart with the money my mother had worked so hard to save. I'd watched my net worth grow slowly but steadily, imagining it would provide security in my old age, maybe allow me to help my children when they truly needed it, perhaps leave something for my grandchildren's education. But the account had been bleeding slowly for years. Every emergency, every request, every guilt-laden phone call had taken another piece. The stock portfolio I'd built so carefully had been liquidated bit by bit. Even the Bitcoin I'd held onto had been sold last spring when Michael said he was going to lose his apartment. I'd watched the value go up and up, imagining that maybe this would be my ticket to a more comfortable retirement, and then I'd sold it all in a panic when Michael called, his voice desperate and scared. Later, I'd learned he'd used the money to buy that luxury sedan. When I'd mentioned it, he'd gotten defensive, said he needed a reliable car for work, that I didn't understand the pressures he was under. The numbers in my bank account grew smaller while my children's needs seemed to grow larger. I pulled up my banking app, something I'd been avoiding for weeks because seeing the balance made my chest tight with anxiety. The number glowed on the screen, stark and unforgiving. Less than $10,000 left. At 63 years old, with retirement looming, I had less than $10,000 to my name. I didn't respond to Michael's text. Instead, I set the phone face down on the side table and closed my eyes, trying to breathe through the panic rising in my throat. Memories came flooding back, unbidden and sharp. Sarah, at 16, screaming that she hated me because I wouldn't let her go to an unsupervised party at a house where I knew there would be drinking. "You're ruining my life. You don't understand anything." She'd slammed her bedroom door so hard a picture fell off the hallway wall, the glass shattering on the hardwood floor. I'd picked it up, hands shaking, and hung it back up with new glass I'd paid for from my grocery budget. The next morning, she'd acted like nothing had happened, came downstairs in a good mood, asked me for $20 for lunch with friends. And I'd given it to her, relieved that she wasn't angry anymore, desperate for her smile. Michael at 12, after I'd worked a double shift and come home exhausted to find he hadn't done his homework, hadn't cleaned his room like he'd promised. The sink was full of dishes he'd promised to wash. His backpack was thrown in the middle of the living room floor, spilling papers everywhere. "You're never here anyway," he'd muttered when I tried to talk to him about responsibility. "Why do you even care?" I'd cried in the bathroom that night, sitting on the edge of the tub with the water running so he wouldn't hear me, wondering if he was right, if working so hard to provide for them meant I was failing them in some deeper way. The sacrifices stretched back as far as I could remember. Giving up my dreams of going back to school for my nursing degree upgrade because Sarah needed braces and Michael wanted to play travel hockey. I remembered the consultation with the orthodontist, the way Sarah's face had lit up when he said braces would fix her bite, give her a beautiful smile. I remembered the cost, $3,000, and the way my stomach had dropped. And then Michael's hockey coach pulling me aside, telling me Michael had real talent, that with travel hockey he could maybe get a college scholarship someday. Another $3,000 a year. I'd done the math in my head, calculated what I'd need to give up. The night classes I'd been planning to take, the small savings I'd been building for emergencies. I'd chosen them. I'd always chosen them. Eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so I could afford their summer camps. Working every holiday, every weekend, taking every extra shift the hospital offered. coming home with my feet swollen and my back aching. Christmas morning, I'd work the early shift, 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., then rush home to make dinner, to watch them open presents, to pretend I wasn't exhausted down to my bones. I'd put their father through school, supported us on my nurse's salary while he got his business degree. I remembered those years, working nights so I could be home with the kids during the day, sleeping in fragmented chunks, always tired, always stretched thin. Robert would study at the dining room table while I made dinner, would complain if the kids were too loud, needed quiet to concentrate. I'd shush them, take them to the park even when I was dead on my feet, anything to give him the silence he needed. Then he'd left, found someone younger, someone who hadn't sacrificed her youth and beauty to raising his children. Jennifer was 28 when they met, young enough to be his daughter, with smooth skin and a flat stomach, and no idea what it meant to give up everything for someone else. The divorce settlement had been minimal. He'd hidden assets, claimed his business was failing even as he moved into a house twice the size of ours. My lawyer had said I could fight it, but the legal fees would be astronomical, and there was no guarantee I'd win. And the kids were upset enough, Sarah crying every night, Michael getting into fights at school. So I'd signed the papers and let him walk away, watching him build his wealth while I struggled to keep us afloat. "You're smothering us, Mom." Sarah had said that when she was 22, newly married, living in her first house. I'd stopped by with groceries, knowing money was tight for them with David still in law school. I'd packed the bags carefully, choosing things I knew she liked, brands she preferred but probably couldn't afford. Organic vegetables, the good coffee, fresh flowers to brighten her kitchen. She'd looked at the bags of food with something like disgust, her face twisting in a way that made her look like a stranger. "We can take care of ourselves. You need to stop treating us like children. It's embarrassing." I'd left the groceries on her counter and driven home in silence, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, wondering what I'd done wrong. I'd only wanted to help. But somehow helping had become smothering. Love had become embarrassment. But when they needed money for the down payment on their second house, the bigger one in the better neighborhood with the good schools, they'd had no problem asking. Sarah had called on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice bright and excited. "Mom, we found the perfect house. It's in Naperville, great schools, big backyard for kids someday. But we're short on the down payment. Could you loan us $30,000? We'll pay you back, Mom, with interest. I promise. As soon as David makes partner, we'll pay you back everything." I'd heard the hope in her voice, remembered her face when she talked about her dreams, about the life she wanted to build. And I'd said yes, even though it meant cashing out most of my retirement savings, even though my financial advisor had looked at me with concern and asked if I was sure, if I understood what I was giving up. That had been 6 years ago. David had made partner 3 years ago. I'd never seen a penny of it. When I'd mentioned it once, gently, Sarah had gotten upset, said they had law school loans to pay off, said I was making her feel guilty, that it wasn't about the money, was it? It wasn't like I needed it. I had my nurse's pension coming. I'd be fine. But I wasn't fine. The pension was smaller than expected, barely enough to cover my rent and basic expenses, and I'd given away the cushion that would have made everything easier, given it away to a daughter who couldn't even invite me to Christmas. The doubts crept in like fog, cold and disorienting. Was I just an ATM to them? A convenience? Someone to call when they needed something? To be dismissed when they didn't? The thought made my chest tight, made it hard to breathe. I stood up and paced my small living room, 5 steps one way, 5 steps back, feeling like a caged animal. I walked to my bedroom, to the old jewelry box on my dresser. Inside was the gold bracelet my mother had given me on my wedding day. "Something old," she'd said, fastening it around my wrist. "This belonged to your grandmother, and her mother before her. Strong women, Clara. You come from strong women, don't you forget that." I'd thought about selling it last year when my furnace broke and I couldn't afford the repairs. I'd sat in my cold apartment for 3 days, wearing every sweater I owned, sleeping under every blanket, before Michael had finally returned my calls. He'd told me about his new car, a luxury sedan he'd just purchased, going on about the leather seats and the sound system before I could even mention my broken furnace. I'd sold some of my remaining stocks instead and said nothing about the cold, not wanting to burden him, not wanting to be the needy mother he'd have to deal with. The evening stretched ahead of me, empty and endless. I made myself a cup of tea, the cheap kind from the grocery store, not the good loose leaf I used to buy before every dollar started counting. I sat at my small kitchen table and stared at the wall calendar. December 25th was circled in red marker, my own hand from months ago when I'd still been excited about Christmas, still imagining a house full of laughter and grandchildren and love. I'd written Sarah's 2 p.m. in the little box, had already planned what I'd wear, what dessert I'd bring. I'd been looking forward to it since last Christmas, counting down the days. My birthday had been 3 weeks ago, November 20th. I'd woken up that morning with the flu, my body aching like I'd been hit by a truck, my head pounding so hard I could barely open my eyes. I'd stayed in bed, too weak to get up, and waited for the phone to ring. Surely they'd remember. Surely someone would call. The day had passed in a feverish haze. I'd dragged myself to the bathroom, leaning heavily on the walls, my legs shaking. I'd made it to the kitchen for water, my throat raw and burning. My phone had remained silent, sitting on my nightstand, mocking me with its blank screen. At 8 o'clock that night, I'd finally checked it, thinking maybe I'd somehow missed their calls, maybe the fever had made me sleep through the rings. Nothing. Not a text, not a voicemail, not even a Facebook post. I'd scrolled through Facebook, seeing birthday wishes on other people's walls, cheerful messages and photos and celebrations. My wall was empty. Maybe there's some truth to that. But Mom, we need you. The kids need their grandmother. Then treat me like I matter. Not just when you need something. All the time. Treat me with respect and consideration. Include me in your lives because you want to, not because you feel obligated. Stop asking me for money and then ignoring me when I can't or won't give it. I can do that, Sarah said quickly, too quickly. I will do that. I promise. Things will be different. I looked at her carefully, studying her face, trying to see past the tears to the truth beneath. I've heard promises before, Sarah. I have a whole box of cards full of promises and declarations of love. Words are easy. Actions are what matter. Then let me prove it to you. Let me show you things will be different. Please, Mom, give me another chance. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. But I'd been disappointed too many times, hurt too deeply. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. It requires more than words, more than promises. We'll see, I said finally. But Sarah, understand this. I'm not going back to how things were. I will not send money every time someone asks. I will not drop everything to accommodate your needs while mine are ignored. I will not accept being treated as optional. If you can respect that, then maybe we can rebuild our relationship. But it will be on different terms, completely different terms. Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Okay, I understand. Different terms. I can do that. I want to do that. She left shortly after, and I stood at my window watching her car pull away, the taillights disappearing into the winter dusk. I felt exhausted, wrung out like a dish rag, but also strangely at peace. I'd said what needed to be said. I'd drawn my boundaries clearly. Now it was up to Sarah to decide what she did with that information. I didn't expect things to change overnight, and they didn't. But slowly, over the following weeks, I noticed small differences. Sarah started texting me just to check in, not to ask for anything. Hope you're having a good day, Mom. Saw this and thought of you, with a photo of a sunset. She sent photos of the grandchildren with captions like, Emma made this in art class. Thought you'd like to see it. And Jack said something funny today and I thought of you. Small gestures, but meaningful ones. The kind that showed she was thinking of me, that I existed in her mind beyond my utility. Michael was slower to come around. He sent me one angry text about how I'd changed and wasn't the mom he knew anymore. I don't even know who you are now, he wrote. This isn't the mom who raised me. I responded simply, You're right. I have changed. The question is whether you can accept that or not. He didn't respond for a week. Then, out of nowhere, he called. We talked for an hour, really talked. Maybe for the first time in years. He apologized for taking advantage of me. He admitted that he'd gotten too comfortable with me being his safety net, that he needed to take more responsibility for his own life. He told me about his financial struggles, really told me, not just asking for money but actually sharing what was going on. He'd been living beyond his means, trying to keep up appearances, and it had caught up with him. I didn't know if he meant it. Time would tell. But it was a start. February arrived, bringing the promise of spring even though Chicago was still frozen solid. My watercolor class started, and I discovered I had a talent for it, an eye for color and composition that my instructor praised. My instructor, a patient woman named Judith with paint-stained fingers and kind eyes, praised my use of color, my attention to detail, my willingness to experiment. Every Tuesday evening became sacred to me, 2 hours of pure creation and learning, time that was completely my own. I made friends in the class. Elena, a retired teacher with a sharp wit and a talent for painting birds. Robert, a widower finding new purpose after his wife's death, his landscapes full of melancholy beauty. We started meeting for coffee after class, talking about art and life and everything in between, real friendships, based on shared interests rather than obligation or blood. My trip to Santa Fe arrived in late February. I'd never traveled alone before, and I was terrified. But I went anyway, flying across the country to spend a week painting in the desert, the landscape so different from Chicago it felt like another planet. The workshop was intensive and wonderful. I painted sunrises that set the sky on fire with color. I painted adobe buildings glowing pink in the late afternoon light. I painted the vast New Mexican sky, so blue it hurt to look at. I ate meals with strangers who became friends. I stayed up late talking about color theory and composition and the meaning of art. On the last night of the workshop, sitting on the patio of the house we'd been using as our studio, I looked up at the stars. They were brilliant here, thousands of them, millions maybe. So different from the few visible stars in Chicago. I felt small, but not insignificant. I felt part of something larger, connected to the universe in a way I'd never felt before. I took a photo and sent it to Sarah and Michael, captioning it simply, New Mexico, I'm learning to paint. Sarah responded immediately. That's beautiful, Mom. I'm so proud of you. Michael's response came a few minutes later. That's awesome. When you get back, can I take you to dinner? I'd love to hear about it. My treat. Small gestures, but they mattered. I flew back to Chicago in early March, returning to my small apartment with a renewed sense of purpose. I'd brought back several paintings, works I was genuinely proud of. I hung them on my walls, replacing the space where the family photos had been. Desert landscapes and vast skies, and the play of light on adobe walls. Mrs. Jenkins came over to see them and gasped with delight. Clara, these are wonderful. You have real talent. These look professional. I'm just learning, I said. But I was pleased, allowing myself to accept the compliment instead of deflecting it. You're doing more than learning, she said, her wise eyes meeting mine. You're living. She was right. For the first time in decades, I was living rather than just existing. I was pursuing my own interests, making my own choices, prioritizing my own happiness. It felt revolutionary. Michael did take me to dinner when I got back. We went to a nice Italian restaurant, the kind with cloth napkins and candles on the tables, and he insisted on paying. We talked about my trip, about his job, about his life. He didn't ask me for money. He didn't need anything from me except my company. It felt good. It felt real. Sarah invited me over for Sunday dinner a few weeks later. It was awkward at first, all of us trying to navigate this new dynamic, but we worked through it. Emma showed me her school projects, proud and chatty. Jack climbed into my lap and asked me to read him a story, his small body warm and trusting against mine. Sarah and I did dishes together afterward, and she told me about her work stress, her concerns about the kids, her life. Not asking me to fix anything, just sharing, treating me like a friend. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, old patterns trying to reassert themselves. But we were both trying, both working to build something new from the ruins of what we'd had before. Spring came to Chicago, tentative and beautiful. I continued my watercolor class, moving into more advanced techniques. I started selling some pieces at a local craft fair, not for the money, but for the validation of knowing my work had value to others, that I could create something people wanted. I joined a book club at the library. I volunteered at a community garden, getting my hands dirty, watching things grow. I filled my life with activities and people that brought me joy rather than obligation. My relationship with my children stabilized into something new. We saw each other regularly, but on my terms as well as theirs. They respected my boundaries. They valued my time. They treated me like a person rather than a resource. It wasn't the relationship I'd imagined when they were small, when I'd dreamed of big family gatherings and constant togetherness. But it was real and honest and healthier than what we'd had before. One Saturday in May, I was sitting in my living room working on a new painting when I heard a knock at my door. I opened it to find Sarah and the grandchildren standing there with a small cake and flowers, bright tulips in my favorite colors. "We know it's early, but we wanted to celebrate your birthday with you," Sarah said, her smile genuine. "The actual day is next month, but the kids have a school thing that weekend, and we didn't want to miss it. We wanted to make sure we celebrated with you." My birthday. They'd remembered. They'd planned ahead. They'd made me a priority. We spent the afternoon together, eating cake. The kids telling me about school, Sarah and I talking about art and life, and her plans to take a pottery class herself. When they left, Emma hugged me tight and whispered, "I love you, Grandma. I'm glad you're happy now." "I love you too, sweet girl," I said, my voice thick with emotion, wondering what she saw that made her think I was happy, and realizing she was right. After they left, I sat in my armchair and looked around my apartment. It was smaller than Sarah's house, more modest. The furniture was old, the building showing its age. But it was mine. Every book on the shelf, every painting on the wall, every choice in decoration reflected who I was, what I valued. I thought about the Clara I'd been a year ago, waiting desperately for phone calls that didn't come, giving and giving until she'd hollowed herself out, becoming a shell of a person. That woman felt like a stranger now. I'd mourned her, but I didn't miss her. I picked up my phone and found the photos from my trip to Santa Fe. The desert landscapes I'd painted, the new friends I'd made, the stars in that brilliant sky, more stars than I'd ever seen. I posted one of the photos online with a simple caption, "It's never too late to become who you were meant to be." The responses came quickly. Friends from my watercolor class, people I'd met through volunteering, Mrs. Jenkins, even a few old nursing colleagues I'd reconnected with. Words of encouragement, of admiration, of shared experience. And then, surprisingly, from Sarah. "So proud of you. Mom, you've taught me that it's okay to choose yourself. Thank you for that example. I'm trying to do better, to be better. I love you." I read her comment several times, feeling tears prick my eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of something else. Relief, maybe. Hope. Pride. The sense that maybe, Just maybe something good had come from all this pain. I'd done it. I'd reclaimed my life. I'd set boundaries. I'd chosen myself. And in doing so, I'd actually improved my relationships with my children. By refusing to let them treat me poorly, I'd forced them to treat me better. By valuing myself, I'd taught them to value me. It hadn't been easy. There had been pain and fear and moments when I'd wanted to give up and go back to the familiar patterns, to the comfortable dysfunction I knew. But I'd persevered. And now, on the other side of it, I could see that it had been worth it. That evening, I worked on a new painting. A self-portrait, something I'd never attempted before. I painted myself as I was now, gray hair and lined face and all, not trying to hide my age or soften the marks time had left. But I also painted the light in my eyes, the set of my shoulders, the small smile playing at my lips, the confidence in my gaze. I painted myself as a woman who knew her worth. A woman who'd learned, finally, that love shouldn't require you to erase yourself. A woman who'd discovered that the most important relationship you can nurture is the one you have with yourself. When I finished hours later, I stepped back and looked at it critically. It wasn't perfect. The proportions were slightly off, the colors not quite right in places. But it was honest. It was real. It was me. I hung it on the wall where the family photos used to be, right next to the mirror my grandmother had given me. Past and present, reflection and representation, all coexisting in the same space. Summer came and went, bringing with it more changes. I expanded my art practice, started teaching a beginner's watercolor class at the community center, sharing what I'd learned with others who were just beginning their own journeys. I traveled again, this time to Vermont for a week-long painting intensive in the mountains. I said yes to things that interested me and no to things that drained me, no longer feeling guilty about prioritizing my own needs. My relationships with Sarah and Michael continued to evolve. There were setbacks sometimes, moments when old patterns tried to resurface, when one of them would forget and slip back into old habits. But we'd talk through them, address them honestly. We were learning, all of us, how to love each other without losing ourselves. One evening in late October, almost a year after Sarah had told me not to come for Christmas, she called. I saw her name on my phone and felt only a mild curiosity rather than the anxiety that used to accompany her calls, the fear of what she might need or what crisis I'd have to solve. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Mom. So I wanted to ask you something. We're planning Christmas this year, and I wanted to make sure you could come. The kids are insisting you have to be there, and honestly, so am I. Would you come for Christmas Eve dinner? Stay over if you want? Or just come for the evening, whatever works for you, whatever you're comfortable with. I smiled, looking out my window at the Chicago skyline. I'd love to come for dinner. I'll drive home afterward, though. I have plans with Mrs. Jenkins on Christmas morning. That sounds perfect, Mom. Perfect. And Mom, I'm going to do better this year. I promise. Real promise, not just words. I've been working on myself, thinking about things. David and I are in counseling. I'm learning about boundaries and respect and how to be a better daughter. I know you will, sweetheart, and I'm proud of you for doing that work. After we hung up, I sat for a moment in gratitude. Gratitude for the pain that had forced me to change. Gratitude for the strength I'd found in myself. Strength I didn't know I had. Gratitude for the new life I'd built, piece by careful piece. I thought about sharing my story, about the journey from that moment of rejection to this moment of peace. Maybe someone else needed to hear it. Maybe someone else was sitting in their apartment right now, feeling used and undervalued, wondering if things could ever change, if it was too late, if they were too old or too tired or too far gone. They could. I was living proof. Have you ever lived or known someone who lived something like this? A moment when you realized you had to choose yourself, even if it meant risking the relationships you held most dear? Share your story in the comments. Let's create a community of people who understand that self-respect and love aren't mutually exclusive, that you can set boundaries and still be a good mother, a good person. And if this story touched you, if it made you feel less alone in your struggles, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. These stories matter. Your story matters. And together, we can remind each other that it's never too late to reclaim your life, to set boundaries, to choose yourself. Because you deserve to be treated with respect and love, always. Not just when it's convenient, not just when you're useful, always.